the zone to be. From a yin to my yang to my yang to Z. Put a grin on my chin when you come to me. Cause I'll win, I'm a one of a kind, and I'll bring death to the place you're about to be. Another river of blood running under my feet. Forged in the fire lit long ago. Stand next to me, you'll never stand alone. I'm last to leave, but the first to go. Lord, make me dead before you make me old. I feed on the fear of the devil inside of the enemy faces in my sight. Aim with a hand, shoot with a mind, kill with a heart like Arctic ice.
I am a soldier and I'm marching on.
I am a soldier and I'm marching on.
I am a warrior, this is my song.
I am a warrior and this is my song. I'm bask in the glow of the rising war, lay waste to the ground of an enemy shore.
I read you Lima Charlie, loud and clear.
Welcome to episode 13 of Stu and the Nun presents Lima Charlie with special guest John Wagner. Welcome, John.
Hey, thanks, Rob. Appreciate the chance to be here. Looking forward to this.
So let's start off telling us a little bit about yourself, kind of your service, how you decided to go in, what branch you decided, what you decided to do. So let's kind of start from there.
Well, I'm an old guy, like most of us around here. I'll come back and telling the stories of back in the day. I started out in a military family. My father was a full-time National Guardsman. He was the local commander for the unit in Ohio, where I grew up and went to school. And so I was around it all the time, similar to how many of us grew up. But I didn't have to move every year or 2 or 3 years. I stayed in one place for close to 15 years, where I went to high school and grade school and everything. And that allowed me to see how a lot of things work in the Army. But it was a very limited exposure to the military. I didn't get to see a lot of the stuff they do. My dad was battery commander for 2 of the 174th ADA. And I got to go in and play around and go to the armory, play in all the gear, all the equipment and stuff. And as I got into college and stuff, in high school and later into high school, I thought, communications seems to be a good thing, and the Army's got good comm stuff. So I'm going to be a communications person. So I went in, I'm a Mustang. I went in as a PV1 and signed up when I was 17 and joined my dad's unit. And that I would not recommend to a lot of people. Don't go. It's great. I mean, back in the old day, back in the Civil War time period before, families served in similar units all the time. Boy, that takes a strong guts to go into something like that, especially if your dad's the old man. But it was a air defense artillery unit, and of note, it was the Dusters. I don't know if you know what those are, the M42s. Remember the open turret twin Bofors guns like they had in Red Dawn 84? Those kind of units. And I was a radio teletype guy. So it was a brand new piece of equipment in the unit. I was one of the first guys trained on it. Stuck me in
36 Charlie? Is that what that was?
No, 05 Charlie. You're close. 05 Charlie. And that was ANGRC 142 Bravo.
Okay.
Mounted on the old Dodge trucks. Those little shelters with the teletypes and everything on the back of them. National Guard. Got to point that out. So I grew up, back when they had to go every Tuesday during the Vietnam War days, the drill days. I'd help Dad march the units in and look at and inspect vehicles, all that stuff growing up. So I joined back in 81 at the beginning of the Reagan years. We're seeing something of that kind of a thing happening now. But back then, in the very early 80s is when they were kicking off recruiting heavy, Reagan rebuilding from the malaise of the late 70s and the rifts that occurred and made us overextend our forces all over the place after Carter. So my first duty station was Fort Gordon, Georgia. Very strange place to be going. It's very different than now than it was back then, completely different. And then I stayed in the National Guard thinking, you sign up for 6 years, you get your college paid for, and you're like, how can I do 6 years? It went by in a flash. absolutely just right through it. But I stayed in the Guard about 18 years, serving in different units, both in Ohio. Because of my background, I did journalism, I did the radio comms. I became an engineer after a while because I had engineering background with some of the telecoms that I worked for. So they made me an Army, comms engineer for a while. But I've served in the Ohio Guard, the Illinois Guard, the Iowa Guard, the Missouri Guard, the Colorado Guard, and the USAR in Colorado. So over the 35 years total time I spent, I've done active duty, reserve, guard, all of them.
So how is well, it's now called Fort Eisenhower, unfortunately, but how is Fort Gordon different now than it was back then? I spent two different AITs at Fort Gordon, so I know it.
Different AITs. Which AITs did you have?
I was my original one was a 39 Delta, which was DAS 3, which was a mainframe computer repair. And then I had to, as soon as I got to my first duty station, they said, "Oh, by the way, we're doing away with NMOS. You're going back to school." So I had to go back for 39 Golf, which they changed to 74 Golf, which they combined with 74 Bravo now, I think, or whatever it is now, 25 Bravo.
Ooh, wow. Yeah. Well, considering the fact I was started out in radio teletype, which that does not exist anymore. I don't even think they even have an AM radio in the inventory anywhere. 106 radios, TTY 24 teletypes, KW7 encryption devices. You may have bumped into one of those here or there in the museum, probably. I did Brems Barracks at Fort Garden, if you know where Brems is.
No, I don't remember that one.
I was the second to the last company for basic training at Fort Gordon.
Okay.
They had one other company. I was Alpha Company. After Bravo Company went through, there was no more basic training at Fort Gordon. It was all AIT and stuff after that. So we had 4 platoons in my company, the 4 platoons in Bravo, and then you either went to like Fort Leonard Wood or Fort Jackson or down to Columbus, Fort Benning, for your basic training. That's one of the big changes since I was there. And the other one is it's now home of the military police. And I believe, I think the chemical corps is there now, if I'm not mistaken. But when the military police and the signal corps are sharing the same base now, it's way bigger than it was back then.
Yeah, my first AIT was 7.5 months, and my second one was 9. So I spent, within my first 3 years in the military, I spent the bulk of it at Fort Gordon.
At Fort Gordon? Well, I loved it there. Basic training, you don't get to do a whole lot. AIT was a cakewalk because, like I said, I got to grow up with the equipment and stuff, and they had the 106 radios at my dad's unit, and I got to play with them. So I'd go in, I'm 13 and 14 years old, and I'm learning how to tune, because those monsters weren't easy to tune. You just didn't turn on a radio and set it free. You had to load them up for their antennas and everything. So I got to play with that. I got to play with the M16s, growing up. I'd fire those, usually subcal 22 converters in them, all kinds of stuff. So by the time I got to basic training, an AIT, I already knew all the stuff. I self-tested out of the radio program. I already knew how to type. The typing and the Morse code in Signal tripped up more people than anything else they taught. If you were going special forces or some other kinds of duties, you had to take Morse. So those guys, many of them washed out into other programs because they couldn't pass Morse. And if they couldn't pass Morse, they couldn't go into special forces. So they walk around practicing all the time. You hear guys just walking down the hallway going da-da-dit, dit-dit-da, dit-dit, da-da-dit-dit, da-da-dit-dit, da, practicing themselves all day.
Probably in your sleep.
Yes, probably. We're in the old World War II style barracks. Because of the Reagan buildup, they were bringing in a lot more people. On our off-duty hours, we had to convert the barracks that had been closed for 20 years and reopen them. The old 2-level World War II type barracks, which they've torn them all down now. That took forever. And then
asbestos.
Yes, exactly. And that's why they didn't tear anything down for the longest time until they could abate that. The other fun part was I went back as an officer, as a 25 series officer, 25 Alpha, and back to Fort Gordon. So I got to spend another 8.5, 9 months there. After that, about 5 years later. So it made it worthwhile.
But by then, Signal Tower was built. Wait, when was
Yeah,
Signal Tower built?
Signal Tower's been there a long time, but I don't know.
Well, it's
what
not there
they did.
anymore. They tore it down a
Oh,
couple
it's
years
not?
ago. Oh yeah, they tore it down a couple years
Really?
ago. Yeah, it's gone. So
Wow. No, that is way back.
yeah,
Well, when I was in the Iowa Guard, it was a multi-channel unit, and we had a unit, a switchboard that is actually switchboard number 2, serial number 2. It's sitting was sitting at the Signal Corps Museum. The actual switchboard device that we were using for our training, and this was in the late '80s.
Right.
I also served when I was at the Illinois Guard. We were the last unit to adopt the what was the new systems that came up just as we were deploying into the Gulf, and we were the last unit to take that equipment on. They actually finished out like 8 more devices, stuck us in it for training down in Alabama, down in Anniston, and then said, "Okay, we're done. That's the last of it." So I don't even think the Army has that system anymore. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It replaced all the multi-channel stuff.
Was it? It wasn't the TYC-39.
No, I'm trying to remember the family name of them. It's not Singars. That's the single channel radios. It was the signal hopping guys.
Right.
Similar to what we have in our cellular systems now.
Right.
So it was quite different. And then I remember in Gulf War I, they learned how to turn these things on, hook them up, and rather than put them in fixed stations, they could actually deploy these things running across the desert and not have to tear them down. And that was something that, nobody could believe, that you could drive a brigade across and their comms be working on their radios and their phones as they're driving through the desert.
It was some E4 that said, "I'm not tearing this down again. I'm going to figure this out."
We're going to, just hook it up to the generator trailer and let's drive off.
Yeah. Yeah. I told you I'd been there, twice in a very short amount of time. My first AIT, I had to go stand in the promotion ceremony for then Colonel Gray to get his single star. And then my second AIT, he was getting his second star. And then I went back to Fort Knox and went to Germany, and he showed up as the desync with his 3rd star.
Ooh.
So in a matter of about 5 years, he went from an 06 to 3 stars. He moved quick.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, for a signal guy, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
You don't usually see signal guys getting the 3rd star. Usually they'll get their 2 and move on.
Yeah, he retired as a 3.
When I hit captain, I moved out of Signal Corps and into public affairs. That got me into command staff, higher levels. There were a lot more of them out there than signal units. My last real signal job was company commander of the only signal unit in the state, which I stayed in that position for 5.5 years. I did not want to leave it. They normally forced whoever was in that command slot out because A, it was the only one, and B, it was such a great job that had great equipment and great soldiers. Nobody wanted to leave it. It was in Kettering, Ohio. Had a really good signal company, and did that one, like I said, for like 5.5 years, and then moved into public affairs.
So what was the move for progression, or was the move just because you were bored and wanted to do something different?
It was mostly for progression, especially in the Guard. And you were active duty most of the time.
I was. Yeah.
In the Guard system, it's really difficult to get rank. You don't want to make rank quickly unless you're full time, because there's nowhere to go. You've got a unit in a location. They can't make you drive by reg more than like 75 miles. If they're the only place you can go is more than that away, it's by voluntary, I'll take the position and I'll drive. Other than that, you've got one E8, one E9 and one O5 and all the supporting ranks below that. And that's all you get. So, upper progression is very slow and very limited. But at public affairs, separate brigades can have a public affairs guy. The state headquarters has several, and it made it easy. And every single state had a public affairs unit, plus the reserve units.
Those positions really, the first Gulf War, I mean, those guys really played a big part of that. And then when we went into Bosnia, those guys were everywhere. So.
Yep, and that's, you've seen the growth of media now as a combat multiplier. Back in our day, you were right there with the protocol guy. That was, your public affairs protocol and a couple of other dudes on the lower end of the command staff. And, it wasn't the type of position like we've got them and the type of work that we got them doing now.
Right.
Later on in my career, it came to help a lot because I became more of a planner and, planning out the messaging by the activities that we're doing, which I disagree with having to, determine what we're going to do, how we're going to hit somebody just because of the message. I think that factors into it, but, planning out almost an entire campaign just to send a message of some sort, that's gotten us away with what warfare is really about.
Right.
For the wrong reasons too. But later, that made me, into very important type of position and contributor to a lot of the planning sessions that I was able to do at CENTCOM as well as in Iraq.
Would you say public affairs is more of a political position or a political than maybe military position?
As an officer, yes. As an officer, it has become that. And I will say the same thing for IO, if not even more so in many respects. Right. Because IO's got a lot more freedom in how they can construct their messaging and who they're hitting and what their goals are, whereas public affairs has one: inform. That's it.
Right.
While we can shape it by what we're informing and how we're doing it and where we're doing it, you don't get it. You don't get to play cute like you can with IO.
Well, I mean, a good portion of it is after the fact, isn't it? I mean, you try to get out there what you can ahead of time, but you're also having to go behind the scenes, after the fact and kind of clean up the mess. I remember some of the guys telling me some stories about, this 07, 08, whatever. He's an idiot, doesn't know what he's talking about. Every time he comes out there, we just tell him, read the script, shut up.
Well, a good public affairs guy can fix that on the front side and not have to worry about so much the cleanup other than what did they actually write about. Most of our cleanup or most of our after stuff is, you had this fact wrong, or you had this out of sequence, or no, he didn't really say this, or you lost the context for this. That happens with almost every story, depending on, what they're trying to write about. Most of our bread and butter used to be the grip and grins, I know we did several things where all we wanted to do was send the hometown news release. I spent several years, the 2-week ATs or summer camps that we did. That's all we did. There was nothing else to write about, and you weren't expected to do much more than that. Right. Maybe if you could get a local interview with the general or something like that, that would be great. Beyond that, we were just sending hometown stories. Hey, here's Private Snuffy. Here he is in his tank, or manning the M60. The unit's on their 2-week tour up in Grayling, Michigan.
Okay. So, so you did your first intro to, we'll say, combat, the first Desert Storm, right? You were still enlisted at that time, right?
No, I was an officer. I was a young lieutenant during the first Gulf War. I didn't deploy. I got activated. I was commanding that signal company at the time, and our equipment was a little out of date. I doubt if they would have used it, other than maybe for some support element, at some, outpost somewhere. And we were very small.
Okay.
But they activated us, and the war was over, and they were packing up before we could get anything loaded. So I got my order to say stand by, and couldn't go anywhere. Had to let them know if I was, going to be out of the AO for any length of time.
Right.
And then boom, it's gone. So, okay, back to, doing our non-deployment training.
So where was your first deployment?
First deployment was Iraq in 2003.
You'd been in a long time at this point.
Yeah. But I did 2003, 2004, and 2005 in Iraq.
Okay.
When I left, the only person who had more continuous time in theater was General Petraeus at that time. Now, after that, guys spent practically a decade in Iraq,
right,
or Iraq and Afghanistan at that time. I never got called up for Afghanistan because I was commanding a public affairs unit in the reserves. And because it was a new unit, they didn't deploy it. They eventually did, I think, in 2009, deploy the unit, which is unusual that it would take that much time to deploy a public affairs unit, because those guys were spending an inordinate amount of time overseas, mostly in backfill positions. But I got the notice in May and sent to train up in July. Went through Fort Bliss, was my departure point, loaded up on the airplane, and then headed over.
What does it take to deploy public affairs? I mean,
Well, I was an individual augmentee. I was on that
Okay.
WIAS, Worldwide Individual Augmentee. So I was an individual call up. I think they call it by name or something like that. They were CENTCOM was short of public affairs group, so my name popped up. Major Wagner, thank you. Get over here. But I had no active duty time other than training for different training assignments or my basic training in officer school. That's it. I had my basic officers course and my advanced officers course, again back to Fort Gordon. But then I went back to a deployment overseas and just didn't have the requisite active duty experience. But what it did do is they selected me to be the chief of protocol for the theater when a few months after I got over there, because of my background with large corporations and public affairs and a couple of other things. He said, "No, you're going to be the protocol chief." Okay, I don't know what that means, but I learned very quickly, and it was the hardest job I've ever had, military or civilian, by far.
what makes that job hard?
You've got to be on top. In that position, remember, for the chief of protocol for the theater, you are responsible for everything above an 06 that pops its head into theater, from other than the president and the vice president. They've got their own handlers, of course, but everybody else, you've got to coordinate. You've got to work with the staffs. You've got to work with the security, housing them, moving them, with the exception of the chairman of the Joint Chief or the SecDef. They've got their own movement teams and stuff. But everybody else is all mine. So I've got to be able to reach out to every possible element within the military to accomplish that, depending on where they need to go and who they want to see. Most of the people that were coming in were commanders, 2- and 3-star generals that were coming in to redeploy or deploy their units in. So they were coming on their staff visits to go see what was going on. Guests of the commander coming in, Codels, pick a Codel. I mean, we're in the early parts of the war, and as soon as they were allowed to come in, bam, they all lined up to do so. And that first Christmas, oh Lord, everybody wanted to be in Iraq at Christmas time seeing soldiers. If
Yeah.
you weren't standing with a whole bunch of bubbas in camouflage around Christmas time, you just weren't doing your job.
Right. So was
So
it like I remember where some of them, not all of them, would come in at the end of one month and leave at the beginning of the next month so that they get 2 months worth of danger pay?
yes,
The
and that
boondoggles.
got turned around very quickly after they found that going on. That there was a lot more scrutiny over the requested dates once that happened. You betcha.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the
Um,
boondoggles.
this goes back to, I got to work with Robert Williams, a special visit by Hillary Clinton and Jack Reed. They were the only two in their Codell on their visit. Tell me that wasn't special. As well as, Drew Carey and Arnold Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, on and on and on. Half of them I can't even remember anymore. But the USO shows, that would bring in a bunch of them. Gary Sinise, saw him twice, was able to work with him a couple of times. And it was always, different hours of what's going on, who's going where. The worst of it was one of the trips I was supposed to be on a helo accompanying him on. I pulled myself off the last second, and that helo ended up crashing, carrying some troops that were in support of a visit. That was terrible.
Can imagine.
Yeah, and up in Iraq. So it kept you busy. But my Rolodex, I had a Rolodex and one of 3 phones that worked worldwide, globally. I could call any other phone number that could be reached because we had to be able to coordinate and work with staff either in DC or Europe or wherever they were coming from.
Did you ever have to coordinate any like foreign dignitaries or?
No, a lot of that was taken care of by the State Department. But what I would do is help coordinate the schedules of whoever they were visiting within the U.S. military structure. I would work through, my direct boss was General Speaks and General Taguba. And then, my day-to-day stuff, I work with the Chief of Staff for that. But it was an exposure I can never forget.
Right. What was the tempo and where I'm trying to go with this is, visiting during hot times, right? When things are popping off, you're probably not going to have as many visitors, right? Especially from the civilian side coming in, the Hillary Clintons and stuff, even though she's got her own stories.
They
But
wanted
anyway.
to go into the hot times. They
Yeah.
they wanted to prove they weren't afraid of it, but I think secretly they were like, oh God, I didn't go then. But we tried to keep them on the fringe of things. But when I put my public affairs hat back on, you went back into, less secure, less safe activity. For example, when I took Geraldo Rivera around a few times, that was another story I get to go into at times, is sleeping with Geraldo Rivera and his brother and his crew, and all had to share a real tight quarters there on the lake surrounding Victory Palace when he got kicked out of Fallujah. Yes, I will say he got kicked out of Fallujah after only 6 hours in the zone. General Mattis said, I've had enough. We never found out why he got removed. Never spoke of that incident again. But I put him on a helicopter, sent him to Fallujah. 6 hours later, they're sending me out, go get his butt, bring him back to the palace, and you babysit him until he goes home. I said, oh, great. Thank you very much.
Nice. So out of those 3 years, what was your busiest time?
Well, as the head of protocol by far, and then after that, I moved up into the command staff. I'm a plank holder in the command staff at Victory. So one of the first 8 people that were built into the staff when they stood it up, MNFI, and Multinational Force Iraq, which also had the Multinational Corps Iraq established just below it, that had the maneuver units. So for a while, I was manning the PA desk for the command staff. And one story I like to share about that, of how, when you asked, is it a political position now? This position, this type of role, this role became very, very noticeable. My partner, manning that desk at the time was John Paradis, Major John Paradis, who now works for a VA up in New England. He and I were sitting there one evening just before Fallujah II kicked off in November of 2004. And the commanding general comes in. I can't remember his name. Is a 3-star Aussie, huge guy. He was like 6'4", 6'5", big guy, 3-star. Really, he's a popular dude, but really stern. And just before they announced that they were going over the berm, before they sent the real troops in, he stands up in front of the entire JOC, and I got a picture of this on my wall for this. And he says, and I'm going to do a really bad accent, but you got to get it to understand what he's doing. He says, "All right, I need everybody's goddamn attention in here right now. We're about ready to get serious here." He said, "You all have got to be on your game tonight." This is about about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, and in the Palace Command Center. "Everybody's got to be on your game tonight. You got to be able to be prepared to support all these bubbas that we're getting ready to send over the line out there. I want every stinking one of you, and I'm looking at you, and you, all of you, to understand one thing, and one thing mostly for tonight. Everything you do, everything you hear coming in on those reports and those files that we're doing tonight, you have to run them through those 2 iron majors sitting right there." And he's pointing at John and I. And we're looking at each other and said, no. 2 public affairs guys are not going to be the focus of a battle this monumental. No. There's 506s, 3 of them are combat pilots sitting down there, running the operation side of things. And he's telling us you got to run it through the public affairs guys? Are you kidding me? Every eyeball in that room looking over at us going, "We got to run it through the public affairs guys?" I'll never forget this. I cannot imagine at what point it went through somebody's mind that our war is going to be channeled through the public affairs team in the war room. John and I still, to this day, can't believe it. Anything like that came about. But it was one of the more bizarre moments during my time in Iraq for 3 years.
Well, I mean, I would have to believe in the public affairs that I've met and dealt with. I mean, those guys were, better communicators than, say, an 06 former pilot, right? Or even that 07 or whatever. The public affair guys, they were on point every time. Very well spoken, very well, well read, and knew everything about everything, and knew exactly what to say and how to say it. Whereas you throw somebody else in front of the camera, you never know what's going to spill out.
Well, you bring up a really good point. If you look historically, what's happened in public affairs at that time, in the spokesman's roles and stuff like that, they weren't public affairs guys. If you remember the Dan and Kimmett shows that went on, 5 o'clock or so every night, when we were hot and heavy there in 04 and 05, Kimmett was not a public affairs guy. He was an infantry dude coming out of the 173rd, I think, if I'm not mistaken, or the 18th Airborne Corps at least. And he didn't have any hardcore training as a public affairs or a journalist or anything like that. He was just somebody that they could put up in front of a microphone, looked good, sounded good, and could represent the president and the commanding general. When we had in theater at the time as one of our bosses a 1-star admiral that was the deputy chinfo, a long time public affairs guy that could have done the same thing, but they put Kimmett up for reasons. Get that a lot. Brooks, when he was General Brooks, when he was doing it, wasn't a public affairs guy. Normally, for some reason, that's not the guy they pick. Ryder is one of the few, General Ryder, who was the spokesman under Biden, was one of the few in uniform like that has a long history in Air Force public affairs. And it showed. He was very good in front of the microphone.
Well, I mean, in today's world, I mean, everybody has social media, right? So everybody has a YouTube channel or goes live on Instagram or whatever.
Except me.
so almost anybody can do it now. But, you know, back then you didn't want the knuckle draggers, you know, speaking to the camera, because, again, every other word was probably an F-bomb. Every other word was, you know, you never know what intel was going to sneak out.
You're 100% correct. There is a rule in the public affairs community. You do not interview the EOD guys. You don't interview the EOD guys because of that rule, and they're loud. They have to talk loud. What'd you say? I'm sorry. Did you hear it? Oh, do you see that engine go off? Man, that was the big gun boom I've ever saw, right?
Yeah.
And that's a quote. So,
yeah.
You know, from one of them someplace. But they're fun guys to interview. I took several guys out into the red zone for different places that they wanted to go interview or look at things. Like went into Sadr City, and that was ugly. When I helped put on the arraignment for Saddam, the first time that he was seen in public, I was working some of the transport and some of the logistical things for the public affairs that supported that, and one of the few that got to go into the room where they held it and actually see Saddam as he shuffled in there to appear before the judges. A story I like to tell about, and I'll tell this to anybody that'll listen, I like to tell about Christiane Amanpour, who I will call the C word to her face. All right. Yeah, if she ever happens to get a clip of this, yes, you are the C word. I'll spare your listeners the hardness, because she's probably the worst journalist I have ever met in my life. I you know, people getting dropped out of helicopters, she would be my first pick. She was just horrifically bad person, and I can tell you that because of the stunt that she pulled during the arraignment, in order to get in, number one, and in order to get excused to get out to be the first person to report on it, she had no morals. She has no ethics. Zero. It's all about her. And I've never seen anything like it before or since.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, I was going to go into the kind of your favorite and then your least favorite, but I think you just gave us your least favorite.
Least favorite, yeah. Favorite is Robin Williams, hands down. Nobody is even close. Gary Sinise is a very close, is as close a second as you can get, but that's a given. Robin, when he came in, and it was with the USO, he came in with Chairman Myers, and as his like official escort, and there was a very famous NASCAR driver that was with him as well. To show you how big an impression Rob made on me, I don't even remember the driver's name, but if you're a NASCAR fan, you would know him immediately. And no, it wasn't Dale Earnhardt or anybody like that, or Dale Jr. It wasn't that. Okay. But Robin, if we took him to see soldiers and there were 1,000 soldiers there waiting to shake his hand, he would want to stay until he did that. He did not want to leave and let anybody be disappointed they didn't get a chance to meet him.
That's awesome.
And he was dedicated. He literally rode himself into the ground while he was doing it. Bruce Willis did a masterful job. He toured with a band that he had that included the CEO of Krispy Kreme. Did a lot of shows, and they were willing to get out there in front of everybody. Very personable. Several of them are like that. I was very grateful that they came over and did it. And, you know, none of them were a handful. No Hollywood stuff. I wouldn't have stood for it. If anybody would have given me that kind of stuff, I said, okay, next. But we never had to put up with anything like that.
Toby Keith?
No, I didn't have Toby when I was there. I think he came shortly after I left that position.
Okay. I knew he did a lot of USO tours.
Yep, he
lot.
did. Later on, though, most of his stuff came in after I had gone. That's where I ran into, the chance to meet a lot of folks. I'm not somebody that seeks the limelight or looks for, the handshakes and the autographs and stuff. I want that for the troops, the guys that are there, the ones that they've come to see. My job is just to make sure that happens.
Right.
And that made me very proud that I was able to make that happen on so many occasions. Even the Codells that came over were pretty good for the most part. Hillary's was one that will go down in the record books for a multitude of reasons, but it won me no friends in the State Department. They still can't believe that I arranged a visit between a former First Lady, sitting U.S. Senator, and the wife of the leader of the Kuwaiti government. Without their involvement, that really frogged some toads over there. But that was fun. My boss, General Speaks, said, "You don't report to them. Don't worry about it." I told you to make it happen. It happened, and it went off well, so we're all good. It was his problem to deal with the State Department.
Right. Yeah. I can imagine. What she's high. She's not very high on my list of favorite people.
Well, Jack Reed was good. Senator Reed was very personable. He's about my size anyway. And of course, he was chairman of the Senate Armed Service Committee at the time. And even though Hillary was former First Lady and a senator, because she was a freshman senator, she could not go on her own accord. She had to be a follower or sponsored. So Reed, arranged that for her. And it was a big meet and greet and chance to meet soldiers and stuff from New York, etc. But that experience at 3 years allowed me to go on, start an airline that flew over there. The only airline initially that was allowed, civilian airline that was allowed to fly in and out of Baghdad. I had 168 missions in and out of BIAP by the time I left. And then went on to work at CENTCOM for about 9 years in various capacities, doing much of the background work and planning, in strategic communications, they call it now, or at least did back then, for a lot of the stuff you guys saw on the news every night.
Right.
I like to tell the story that between, say, 2009 and 2016, most of what you saw going on in the theater involved either something that I was doing and supporting with a team, a very, very small team there, or involved going in after action and helping shape the messages that the commander and his team were putting out. The only thing I did not partake in at all was the Bin Laden takedown.
Okay.
As you can imagine, that's echelons above us.
Right. Right.
But
looking back at your time there, right? First deployment and kind of the hindsight view of that. What is your view, of the entire, I know you didn't do Afghanistan, but you kind of almost have to pull that into the view, even though you didn't go there, because it's, it was going on at the same time. Right. And so they kind of both had effects on each other, whether it was equipment, whether it was manpower, whether it was, communications, they all played against each other. So.
Yes. And, messaging and everything and the comms programs that they tried to do, they were all very important to what they were trying to do. But the end result never made it because politicians, just like in several other conflicts, pick one, refused to follow the rules of war in order to win it. World War II was the last war we won, hands down, because the opponent was submissive. They submitted, they straight out, we helped them rebuild, and now they're, very close with us, at least mostly Japan is anyway.
Right.
Germany, people have got their opinion on that one, but Japan is very close with us, and of course they were our bitterest enemy. The latter part of World War II. That we can't say in Iraq. We cannot say that at all in Afghanistan, even though we quote unquote defeated them. We changed the regimes, at least initially. But I think we went in with the right intentions. I think we went in to prove a point. We did that very well. I think if we would have gone in, done the push, pulled the troops out, and, done some security operations, not, the other stuff, I think we'd have been better off in hindsight. I think, and I hope, as we talked before the show began, I hope that our kids and our the people that follow on after us also realize this, both in the government and in the military. It's like what Pete's trying to push, Secretary Hegseth. We can't be these global policemen. We've got to be in there for a reason, fight for a reason, and then leave for that reason. I think that's the right way to look at it. And maintain security, maintain commerce, do away with, correct those that are trying to prevent that and attack our freedoms as well. And then once that's it, move away. It's not our responsibility.
Yeah. Gone are the days where you plant your own flag and you take over the territory, right? But every politician seems they're working towards their next re-election, right? But when it comes to war, politicians seem to listen to the global stage and how it affects them more so than they listen to their own constituents. Their own constituents can scream and yell all day, and they hardly react. But the way they look on a global stage, if it makes them look bad, they want to change, right? And so the politics seeps into war, and it's not always good.
Privately, there are some things that I saw that led me to believe something very different as to why we went into Iraq, at least not as the main reason, but a strong contributor is the economy. If you recall, at that time, the internet bubble had burst.
Yeah.
And it was one of the highest levels of unemployment we had for a long period. It wasn't looking good to build that back up. And to be honest, I think, in my personal opinion, that they looked at it, here's a way we can kill two birds with one stone. We can build up our economy, yes, build it on the back of the defense sector, but we could also take care of a problematic government and situation in the Middle East at the same time. Wow. One washes the other. I think that's kind of what was in the back of many mind. It might not have been the forefront of it, but it certainly didn't dissuade anybody from thinking, no, maybe we shouldn't do this.
Well, I mean, the entire thing swept in, you did get some new technology, but you got great, some, what I would consider some horrible legislation come out of it, right? So the Patriot Act and things that sweeping into the government and into our lives that they've yet to release, their hold, right?
Well, the Patriot Act, good intentions, but as with many laws over time, has been subjugated to the whims of the politicians and interpretations of the courts since then.
Yeah.
That's the problem. It needs to be revamped. It needs to be relooked at, if not done away with completely. There might be elements of it, since I don't know every phrase in it, I can't say it for 100%, but I would say a majority of it probably needs to be repealed and reapplied in some different fashion. Certainly the FISA parts of the Patriot Act and those kind of elements.
Well, I mean, technology changes, every day, right? And law is never up to speed with technology. It's always behind. Just like when they come out with an illegal drug and they say, okay, well, this drug is illegal, and then the chemists go and tweak one molecule the other way, and now it's no longer on the list because it's not the same drug, right? So the laws have a hard time keeping up with it. So, So let's kind of switch gears a little bit. And what are some stories that you want future generations to know and to hear and know about things that went on? Whether it's some something great you saw somebody do, some engagement you had. What are some things you want the people to know?
That's the one thing I would want to be able to tell, and I'm hoping that either some young folks are listening to something like this to say, hey, do I want to join, or what do I want to do when I join? How am I going to? Is it worth it? Or family members that want to know that there is nothing like the military out there. Period. You will never engage with people in the way that you do across all services. Yes, I went in an army and spent the first, 12 to 15 years only with the green guys, but then spread it out in, working with the Air Force and the Marines and those guys, all across the services. You won't get that opportunity ever again. Yes, it's very difficult work. Yes, it's very, very, very risky work, but it's life-changing and life-fulfilling. And the stories and the camaraderie and the people. Yeah, I've had some bad commanders. I've had some bad NCOs, but they burn themselves out. They go away. You live to fight another day, mostly. And they make up for it. The good times far make up for the bad. Yeah, you're going to be sleeping in some puddles. Yes, you're going to be in some pretty uncomfortable situations, unless you're Air Force. But the rest of us, it's that suffering together that really made it. Working with some of the foreign armies, like some of the Brits I worked with, certainly the Aussies, some of the Swedish and Nordic guys that we served with, unbelievable people, great times. I am very grateful for that. I always talk about the Marines and their attitude. They're like, we'll do anything. What do you need us to do? They joined our team, in a joint effort, and they were always the ones gung-ho, ready to go. God bless it, let me staple that. Oh, you don't have to do that, sir. Let me staple that, whatever it is. It was a lot of fun. They took a lot of ribbing, but they dished out just as well. And I got a chance to meet a lot of good people. The medrecs. I don't know if you've heard of a medrec, where they send a medical unit into like a third world country to go down and do, some reconnoitering on, what's the health situation like, set up some areas where they can go in and provide some aid, healthcare and stuff to some very, very disadvantaged areas. I did that down in Central America a couple of times. That was life-changing to see it. That was, you felt like you were, not in the military when you were doing that kind of stuff. It was completely different. And the doctors came in, and that took a total team effort, from the pathfinders to the pilots to the doctors to the logisticians, everybody, having to help, pick the bale, tote the equipment, whatever it took to get that set up. It was a lot of fun.
So in something like South America, are you personally, are you interacting with the local governments as well?
Not so much the governments, maybe the local tribesmen or city councilmen, that kind of stuff. Yes. But since I went in as, a public affairs guy, but I didn't speak the language, basically what I did is find, people that can interpret for us and, explain what we're doing, talk about it, going back home, that kind of thing. And, plan how they were going to be done. Who we're going to talk to, what are the type of people we would like to interview, getting the permissions of people that we wanted to talk to, that kind of stuff. Excuse me.
Okay. And any other stories you want people to know?
Some of what we face is going to be changing a lot based on what we're trying to do now. I think we're going to try and get back to, we're not just a military of social values and social engineering, that kind of thing. we need to be back to where we're protecting what we believe in, what our country stands for, and securing the people and our commerce and what we're doing. I think that's the number one thing I want them to look at going forward, and hope that we can continue that mantra and continue all that for the next 100 years. We got away from that. I think if you remember back when they re-emphasized the creed, the Soldier's Creed, about 20 years ago, in the NCO Creed, they at that time they mostly focused on the NCO Corps, trying to build that back up into a stronger ties between the NCOs. I think it's broader now. I think it's across the entire services. It's something that we're going to be focusing on now, and I hope it works out because we need it.
So, real quick in your time, you went across a couple of different presidents, right? So you got to see. So, kind of briefly talk about. I mean, what were the differences as you went through those different things? Because I know in my short time that I was in, I went through a couple of different presidents, right? And I could see a difference in the military, especially under Clinton, how it was.
Yeah. Yep.
So
under Reagan, I mean, I came in under Reagan, and it was, balls to the wall with that. We're going to do this. We've got to stand up. The Cold War time period, we got to stand up to the Soviet Union and what they're trying to do across the globe, and whatever it takes, we're going to try and do it and push, build the military back up, bring in new technologies, that air land battle concept, really took off, under that time period. That was something that changed warfare and how we fight it, for at least 2 generations. Under Bush, it was sort of Reagan light mostly. But like you mentioned in the Clinton years, it wasn't quite Carter-ish, but it certainly was no Reagan. You definitely noticed a time period that the military was less appreciated, I guess is the way to put it. Very much so under Obama. I can remember during the early Clinton years getting spit on just trying to pump gas when I was in uniform. That happened to me twice at that time. Nothing like that under Obama. It's something that I'm seeing that there's a definite turnaround under Trump. I'm not in uniform now, so I'm not as exposed to what the differences are. But I can see the attitudes changing in a lot of the soldiers and the others that I, get to meet and work with now. And it's a good thing to see, especially among the veterans. Veterans are very happy.
yeah, you're seeing it in the recruiting numbers as well. So you can see it across the board. All right. Well, we've been going for about an hour. So any parting thoughts? Any last things?
No, there's so much more that, I could talk to you about, and bore you to death, but some of it is classified.
Right.
Sad to say. The Bergdahl segment, that's 4 years of my military life that I had to deal with, and trying to chase and find that guy. All the missions that we did, directing what was going on over there with some of the droning and other indirect attacks, that we led, and the great results that we got out of those. CQ Brown, who was the former chairman, he was a 1-star on the team that I was working with. Got to work, hand in glove with him for periods of time, as well as some other, very notable, very worthwhile people. That's the number one thing that I'm glad that I got a chance to do. I'm just a little redneck from Southern Ohio, grew up in Appalachia, and never would I have thought I have the opportunity like this that I've had.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you for your evening.
Thanks,
Thank you
I
for
really
sharing your
appreciate it.
stories. Yeah. And so hold on real quick and we'll see you on the other side.